right. So grade 12, so we are going to go through the male reproductive system. And then after looking at that, we'll be looking at the female reproductive system. Then we will be looking at all of the hormones involved in the process. And then after that, we'll look at what happens after pregnancy. So or after fertilization. So the process of implantation and basically the development of the placenta and the umbilical cord. And then at the end, we'll have some questions for you. So we have a full-bodied, content-loaded meal for you today. So let's get right into it. All right. So first up, it all starts with puberty. So this is quite, it looks a bit impossible for this chunky boy to turn into this hunky man, and the only way that this would be possible is because of puberty. And the reason why or how puberty results in this is because of hormones. So I'm going to quickly run through the hormones that result in this, and throughout the lesson we will be referring back to them again. So first of all, there's the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will stimulate the pituitary gland or the hypophysis, and this gland will now release a hormone known as FSH. So FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone, and this is a very important hormone which we will be looking at again in the female reproductive system. So this hormone, as well as LH, will stimulate the testes and the ovaries. So in males, it will stimulate the testes to help with sperm to develop. In males, the LH will also stimulate the testes to release testosterone. So in class, hopefully you have learned about testosterone, and you know that that is a hormone in males, and that hormone will lead to the development of these secondary sexual characteristics. And a few examples of them would be the deepening of the voice, getting a beard, male shoulders becoming more broad, some of these more male-like characteristics, turning from a boy into a man, and that is due to this hormone testosterone. So then females also need to go through puberty, and for that to happen, the same two hormones will start this process. So FSH will stimulate the ovaries to stimulate the ovum to develop. So the ovum is an egg cell, which we'll look at a bit later on in the lesson. And that ovum, or the development of that in the ovaries, will then release estrogen. Then the estrogen will also lead to the development of some secondary sexual characteristics. And then also LH will also stimulate the ovaries, which will result in ovulation and the development of the corpus luteum. Right. Grade 12, it is quite a lot to process, and Lindy and I, we will break this down for you in the rest of the lesson. So we'll look at the structure of the testes, the hormones involved, and then as well as in the female reproductive system, we'll be looking at the ovaries, the egg cell, and all of the hormones involved. But for now, just sort of get the idea that it is due to those three hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, that leads to puberty. So they actually lead to the development of these secondary sexual characteristics. Right, so Lindy is going to take us through the male reproductive system, and then I will take it on from there again with the female reproductive system. Lindy.
Okay, so now we are going to look at the male reproductive system. The male reproductive system consists out of different the male reproductive system consists out of different sections. So we will start at the testes, which is surrounded by the scrotum. The scrotum is a extension of the skin that surrounds the testicles and is there to protect the testicle. It also helps to regulate the temperature of the testicle. So the testicle is outside the body of the male to keep it at 2 degrees lower than body temperature. This is to ensure that normal, healthy sperm is produced. If the testicle is too close to the body, okay, so if it's pushed up close to the body, that will increase the temperature of that testicle. And this will lead to abnormal sperm being produced due to the proteins that denaturate. So it's really important that the testicle is free, hanging and away from the body and not pressed against it. There's a nice question usually in the exam where they say, what happens when a boy wears very tight underwear? And that is when the testicle is pressed against the body then. Inside the testicle, we find the testes. So the testes, there are 2 of them, and they are actually a bunch of little tubules, which we call the seminiferous tubules, okay? And they are found inside the testicle. So if we go look at a cross section of the testicle, we see the following. So we see these tubules is bunched up in little sectors, and then they combine to form the epididymis there at the top. So they connect to each other to form the epididymis there at the top of the testicle, okay? Inside the seminiferous tubule, we've got tissue, epithelial tissue, which will then help to produce in the lumen of that tubule, it will produce sperm cells. So this is the place where we will have spermatogenesis, okay? So it will go from my spermatogonium up right to my sperm cell here at the bottom. Really important, inside these tubules, we also find the Sertoli cells, and these cells help the process of spermatogenesis. Without it, there won't be enough energy for the sperm to mature to a full-blown sperm cell. Okay. Okay, so how are sperm made? So we collectively call gametogenesis for both male and female. So where we have the production of gametes. So gametes is gametogenesis is where we have the production of gametes, but we also differentiate between male and female gametogenesis. So in males, it's called spermatogenesis, and in females, it's called oogenesis. So in sperms, we do not need to know every step of spermatogenesis. It's a really broad description of this process. There's a lot of steps that is included in many textbooks, but you do not actually need to know every step. So it's actually set out very easily. So the first thing you need to know is that it takes place in the testicle, okay? And under the influence of testosterone, remember that hormone that Monica referred to, testosterone, that will cause meiosis to take place inside the testicle, okay? And this will lead to the production of 4 haploid cells, okay? So you don't need to know how they get to 4 haploid cells. All you need to know is that 4 haploid cells will develop. And these cells will then develop into mature sperm cells. Okay, so there are the mark allocation when you need to describe spermatogenesis in the exam. So you'll get a mark for the word or the term spermatogenesis, that it occurs in the testes under the influence of testosterone, diploid cells, okay? So we're going from 46 cells in the seminiferous tubules, that is inside the testes. They undergo meiosis to form 4 haploid sperm cells. Okay, so this is a really nice, if you have your phone with you, just quickly take a picture that you can have this memorandum to go study if you don't have it somewhere else. Okay, so the structure of a sperm cell I would like to draw for you. Remember, when we are in the exam, you must be able to draw the different gametes, including the sperm cell. Okay, so when we draw in biology or in life science, it is important to remember that there are certain rules that must be followed. Firstly, my diagram must have a heading. So I'm going to write diagram of a sperm cell at the top. Okay, and I'm going to underline it to indicate that there is a sperm cell being drawn. Okay, I'm going to draw the head of the sperm cell. Okay, so there's a head, then there is a middle piece, and there is a tail. Okay, so I'll have a head, middle piece, and tail, and I'm going to label them head, middle piece, and tail when I draw my diagram. Inside the head, I have a little bubble in front that is filled with enzymes. This little bubble with enzymes is called the acrosome. So I'm going, in biology, we'd have drawn all the labels to the right side, but I'm going to draw it here so that I have enough space. So this is the acrosome. And the acrosome contains enzymes that will dissolve the membrane of the egg cell so that they can fuse during fertilization. I also have a nucleus with genetic material inside it. Okay, so the nucleus contains the genetic material of the male, and remember that in this case there will be 23 chromosomes. I will have the middle piece. Okay, inside the middle piece I will have mitochondria. Okay, and remember that the job of mitochondria is to provide energy. So I'll have mitochondria inside the middle piece, and they will provide energy for this sperm cell to swim. And then I will have the tail, and that will propel my sperm cell forward. Okay, so this is a really easy diagram to draw. Remember that in your diagram you must have head, mid piece, sorry, I'm going to abbreviate it like that, and then tail there, so that you have all the labels there correctly. So if we go back to the slides, you can see that Monica made us lovely slides that exactly says what I have just explained. So there is the acrosome on that diagram, which have a haploid nucleus. We've got the middle piece with the mitochondria. We've got the flagellum, or the tail, that is responsible for moving forward. Then connected to the no, I'm fine. Okay, connected to the seminiferous tubules, they will combine to form a larger tubule that is on the top of the testicle, which is known as the epididymis. So there is my epididymis. Inside the epididymis, sperm cells are stored temporarily, and they mature into mature sperm cells. From the epididymis, the tube extends upwards and over. You can see it makes like a little loop, and that is called the vas deferens. The vas deferens is a muscular tube that is able to propel the sperm cells forward towards the urethra, okay? And that connects with 3 different glands. Okay, so that is the vas deferens, the orange one. It's really muscular. It contains a layer of smooth muscle. So if I ask you how is the vas deferens adapted for its function, you can say that it contains a layer of smooth muscle that propel the sperm forward during ejaculation. Okay. Then there is 3 glands that is connected to where the vas deferens connects to the urethra. The first one is the seminal vesicle, and they produce a fluid that is responsible for providing energy for the sperm. So it contains lots of fructose that is broken down by the mitochondria during cell respiration. That is in the middle piece of my sperm cell. Then we've got the prostate gland, so that blue section behind the bladder, that is my prostate gland, and that is my largest gland. And this produces prostate fluid, which is alkaline and neutralizes the acids inside the vagina. So it helps to protect the sperm cells. Okay, and then lastly we've got Cowper's gland, which is also an alkaline and a lubricant to protect and help the sperm cells move forward. Then the last section of the I forgot to say that the sperm cells, together with these secretions from the Cowper's gland, the prostate gland, and the seminal vesicles, produces semen. An interesting fact, or something that you should know, is during a vasectomy, the vas deferens is cut. Okay, so it prevents the sperm cells from reaching the urethra. So ejaculation of the fluid here, when a vasectomy has taken place, it will contain the secretions of the Cowper's gland, the prostate gland, and the seminal vesicle, but it will not contain sperm, which will then prevent fertilization. Okay, then there's the bladder, and connected to the bladder, there we find that the vas deferens connects with the urethra, and it forms the urethra that goes through the penis outside, and this is then the route that the semen will take towards the vagina through the penis. Okay, then the penis is the external male genitalia, and it consists of muscle and many blood vessels. When these blood vessels dilate, they will then cause a erection, which then will help during sexual intercourse, and when ejaculation takes place, the semen will then be released into the vagina. Now we are going to look at the female reproductive system with Monica.
Okay, so looking at the female reproductive system, we are also going to have a look at all the structures and all the functions. So this diagram over here would represent the female reproductive system. One of the organs that we have here would be the ovaries. So you can see that you have that there are two ovaries, and these are the notes would say they are glandular because they are a gland and they will release hormones. So here in bold we have two hormones that they are responsible for releasing, estrogen and progesterone. And another feature of the ovaries is this is where an ovum matures, and then eventually an ovum or an egg cell will be released from the ovary, and it will move up into this tube known as the fallopian tube. Right, so for now these are ovaries. They release hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and they are there to produce an ovum. That is where an egg cell matures and forms. So having a look at what this ovary looks like on the inside, so that is just one side. There would be another one on the left hand side. The inside the ovaries, there's a process that takes place from one little primary follicle that will develop into eventually a structure known as a Gravian follicle. Right, so I've highlighted there in bold. So the sort of fully matured follicle is known as a Gravian follicle, and that process will only take place with one little egg cell, which will develop into a Gravian follicle. Right, and that process takes place through meiosis. And you can see here we have a little yellow piece there on the outside, a piece of follicular cells. And then after this egg cell is mature and the follicles are mature, this Gravian follicle is actually going to release the egg cell. So there you can see the egg cell, the gray structure in this illustration is being released, and then what remains is this yellow part. So that is the remnants of this Gravian follicle that is developed, and that structure then will result in something known as the corpus luteum. Right, so here you can see the egg cell has been released, and then what happens to the remains of this egg cell or the follicles is the formation of this Gravian follicle. And what we'll look at a bit later is what happens if a female is pregnant and when she's not pregnant. But if she's not pregnant, this Gravian follicle, this corpus luteum, will become smaller and smaller. And then the process will then just be repeated the next month. So then in the next month, a primary follicle will start to develop into a secondary follicle, a tertiary follicle, and then eventually into a Gravian follicle. And then from there, ovulation will take place, where the egg cell is released, and then the remains, this yellow piece over there, will develop into a corpus luteum that you have there at number 5. And then again, if the woman is not pregnant, the process will be continued again. Okay, so here I just included a few micrographs to show you. Over here we have a beautiful Gravian follicle. Over there on this side we'll have a few primary follicles. So you can sort of see that to go from a primary follicle, and over here number 2 would be a secondary follicle, and number 4 and 5 as a unit would then be a Gravian follicle. So you can see that this whole structure develops, right? And that is all due to hormones, which we'll get to in a moment. All right, so a Gravian follicle will always have this big fluid-filled cavity there, which is illustrated by number 4. And if I just go back over there, so there you can also see this big sort of cavity on the side of this Gravian follicle. Okay, so here we get to if fertilization occurs. So if a sperm cell and the egg cell meet each other, this corpus luteum will remain intact. So then it's not going to become smaller and smaller. It is going to remain the same size, and it is going to maintain the endometrium so that it doesn't break down. Right, so this corpus luteum is then going to release a hormone. It will always release a hormone known as progesterone, but when it remains the same size, it will just keep on releasing progesterone to make sure that that endometrium stays intact, so that it can so that the embryo can implant in there, and that menstruation doesn't happen. Right, then if fertilization does not take place, you can see in this picture the corpus luteum becomes smaller and smaller, so we'll say it will disintegrate. And then number 6, you can see it is almost nothing already. And then what will happen after that is menstruation, and then the process will then just be repeated again. So in a lot of question papers, you might get a little diagram like this, and then they could ask you if fertilization took place at the end of this woman's cycle. And then you'll just have to have a look at, in this case, the corpus luteum. Is it staying the same size, or is it becoming smaller and smaller? Right, so if it's becoming smaller and smaller, fertilization did not take place. And if it is remaining the same size, it means fertilization did take place. All right, so the rest of the process with the hormones involved, we are going to look at that in a minute, because this entire process is maintained by hormones. So to just give you a little bit of a scope, there's a hormone known as FSH, and that hormone causes this follicle to develop, to go from a primary follicle to a Gravian follicle. Right, so FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone, so it literally stimulates this follicle to develop into a Gravian follicle. Then there's a hormone known as LH, and LH will result in the egg cell being released. Right, so there you can see ovulation took place, and that is done through the hormone LH. And then LH also results in this corpus luteum being formed. Right. So as Lindy mentioned, oogenesis is the process that takes place in females, and that is the process to produce an egg cell. Right. For that, there's also a description that they love to ask in your exams. So you need to be able to describe oogenesis, and you need to be able to give a description of what happens. So oogenesis takes place in the ovaries, and it is, that process is under the influence of FSH, that hormone I was just talking about. And in this case, we still go from a diploid cell to a haploid cell at the end, but in this case, only one of the 4 cells that will be formed will survive. So at the end of oogenesis, we will only have 1 haploid ovum. So that is a little bit different in comparison to spermatogenesis, where we started off with 1 diploid cell in spermatogenesis, and we ended off with 4 sperm cells. Whereas in oogenesis, we're starting with 1 and we're ending with just 1 haploid ovum. So how that works is during meiosis, which you probably still are going to discuss in class, you can see after this division, there's a little cell that forms there known as a polar body. And we actually only want the most of the cytoplasm will move to one of these 2 cells. And then when it divides again, the majority of the cytoplasm will move into this cell, and the other cells will sort of just be wasteful cells that will not form an ovum. So we'll still have 4 cells that are formed, but only 1 will have the majority of the cytoplasm, and only 1 will become a mature ovum. Right. So this is oogenesis in the ovaries. We're going from a diploid cell that will first go through mitosis to form follicles, and then 1 cell in the follicle will go through meiosis to form 4 cells. And of those 4, only 1 will become a haploid ovum. So moving on, just like Lindy described the structure of an ovum, we also need to Lindy just looked at the structure of a sperm cell. We also need to look at what an ovum looks like. And you also need to be able to draw an ovum. So this is a bit of I think there are fewer labels. So let's just quickly have a look at how to draw an ovum. So an ovum, you're going to start with your heading ovum. So just a few basic labels that we have here. I would always tell my learners to start from the inside out, because in not all of the diagrams you'll see these follicular cells on the outside. Sometimes in the exams they'll leave that out, and then the learners could get confused. So starting from the inside, we have a nucleus, all right, and this nucleus will then contain the genetic material of the female. Then this nucleus is inside of cytoplasm. That should be easy from grade 10. And then the next layer around it would then be a cell membrane. I'm not sure if that, so just before we get to the jelly layer, so there's a cell membrane that surrounds this ovum, and then you can see there's a little layer before we get to these the cells on the outside, and that layer is called the jelly layer or the jelly coat. And the acrosome, or the sperm cell, needs to swim through the jelly layer to be able to fertilize the the nucleus and the egg cell. So then we have this jelly layer, and then in some cases, in some exams, they also include the follicle cells. Okay, so those are also just remains of this follicle developing. If I'm just quickly going back to that slide, so that follicular cells is just sometimes after the egg is released, there could be some little follicular cells there on the outside, right? But in the exams, they're not always included in the drawing. And then the learners would label the outer layer the jelly coat. All right, so maybe just start with labeling wise from the inside, nucleus, cytoplasm, cell membrane, jelly layer, and then if there's a follicular cell, you can then also label the follicular cells. All right. A last few labels that we have here, we have the fallopian tubes. So when an egg cell is released once a month, the egg cell will move into the fallopian tube, and that is where it will find the sperm cell. Right, so if a sperm cell is there, it will probably get fertilized. So this is the ideal site for fertilization. And then this fallopian tube is then also a type of a pathway. Well, firstly, if sperm moves up here through the vagina, through the cervix, through the uterus, the sperm will also find its way through the fallopian tube. So the fallopian tube is also a route for the sperm cells to swim through. But then after fertilization, that fertilized egg cell will then move back in the opposite direction that the sperm came through, and then it will move through there and implant itself into the endometrium. So this tube is firstly a site for fertilization, and then it is a pathway for sperm cells, and also a pathway for the embryo to move to be able to implant into the endometrium. Right, here we have the uterus, this triangular sort of structure, and the important part here is that layer that is color-coded in a bright red. So that is called the endometrium, and that is where implantation needs to happen. Right, so when we look at the blastocyst, we'll see that the blastocyst needs to implant itself in the endometrium. It is a layer that is blood rich, which is perfect for that embryo to be able to receive oxygen and to be able to grow there. And that blood rich layer is due to the hormone known as estrogen and also progesterone, which Lindy will explain to us in a little bit. Right, so if this if fertilization did not take place, right, there goes the unfertilized ovum, the endometrium will be shed, and that is then known as menstruation, and then the cycle will then just be repeated again. So then the endometrium will build up throughout the cycle, and if fertilization doesn't take place, it will be shed. Right, last two labels, we have the cervix there, and that is an opening of the vagina, and it will stretch during birth. And then lastly we have the vagina, which is the birthing canal. It is also the tube that receives the penis during sexual intercourse. And that is almost all from my side for now. Just a little bit about the hormones, the three that I mentioned a little bit during the lesson. So I mentioned FSH, I mentioned LH, and then I mentioned estrogen and progesterone. So Lindy is going to explain to us exactly how these hormones work, where they will have their effect. But FSH is a hormone that will cause the follicle to develop. LH, as I mentioned, will help with ovulation, and it will also help with the corpus luteum being developed, and then the last two, estrogen and progesterone, will help with the thickening and the maintenance of that endometrium. Right, so I'm going to give over to Lindy next.
Okay, so we are going to talk now about the hormones of the female reproductive system. Just before we start that, I would like to emphasize how hormones work. So if we go look, when we have a hormone, we have a gland, and that gland will release a specific hormone, and that hormone will then have a target organ, and that target organ, it will cause an effect. Okay, so if we go look at the different hormones that we have in the female reproductive system, if we take the first one, FSH, the gland will be the hypophysis or the pituitary gland. The hormone will be FSH. The target is the ovary. And in the ovary, the effect it will have is this stimulation of the follicle. Okay, so this is important to remember this. Okay, so I will have a gland that will release a hormone, that will have a target area or a target organ, and in that target organ, it will have an effect. So let's go look at the slides now. So if we go look at the hormones, we've got two hormones that is released by the pituitary gland. We've got LH and FSH. So at the start of my cycle, day 1, okay, so this is the days at the bottom here. So it starts at day 1 and it ends at day 27 there, okay? And we've got the different levels of hormones. So this is in the ovary there at the top, okay, and this is in the uterus. So that is what this graph is showing me. It is showing me what is happening in the ovary there at the top, and it is showing me what is happening in the uterus here at the bottom, okay? So the reason why the hormones here at the top and in the uterus is different is because they are secreted by different glands. So the two here at the top, FSH and LH, is secreted by the hypophysis or the pituitary gland. Estrogen and progesterone is secreted by the follicle inside the ovary and the corpus luteum inside the ovary, so from the ovary. Okay, so what happens is FSH is released at the beginning of my cycle. So we can see it starts low and it is increasing. It's going up. So FSH target organ is the ovary, and inside the ovary it is going to cause the follicle to develop. So I've got my follicle starting with a primary follicle, and as the days go towards day 14, I see that this follicle with the ovum inside it, that little light colored circle there, that is my ovum. The darker pink colors is the follicle. These cells around the follicle is actually an endocrine gland, and they produce estrogen. So what we see is, as this follicle is developing, it is actually turning into a gland and it's producing estrogen, okay? And this estrogen is then released into the bloodstream, and the target organ of that estrogen is then the endometrium of my uterus. So that is why these two organs are connected to each other. So we can see as FSH is increasing, I'm also going to have an increase in estrogen because my follicle is becoming bigger and bigger. The larger the follicle, the more estrogen will be released. Okay, so now the follicle becomes my Gravian follicle, and we are nearing day 14. Okay. The high estrogen level just before day 14 that is released by the Gravian follicle is then going to send a message back to the hypophysis, which is then going to release the second hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone is going to go and cause ovulation inside my ovary. So it causes the follicle, the Gravian follicle, to burst open and to release the ovum into the fallopian tube. Okay, so the process where I have the Graafian follicle bursting and the ovum leaving and going into the fallopian tube is called ovulation. That is a term that they love to ask. Okay, so it's really important that you should be able to either define it or to identify it when it is asked of you. So ovulation occur in this case on day 14. The other job of LH is to take the remnants, this part that's left behind of the Graafian follicle, and turn it into a corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum is then another endocrine structure, and that will then release progesterone. So we can see after ovulation occur, we see that sudden increase in progesterone. And that is due to the fact that I now have a corpus luteum. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. Estrogen has now caused ovulation, but the other job of estrogen is to thicken the endometrium. So we can see here at the bottom, this is a picture of the endometrium, and it starts thin. And as the estrogen level increases there, I can see that the endometrium is also growing and becoming thicker and more vascular. So I can see that the blood vessels is growing inside the endometrium, creating a space for the blastocyst to attach. Okay? Then after ovulation, remember that every hormone has a target organ. So what is the job of progesterone? Progesterone has two jobs, okay? The first job, it is going to keep on growing the endometrium. Do you see it becomes very thick, very glandular, and very vascular, keeping it intact. So it's preparing for pregnancy. The other job is it sends a message back to the hypophysis saying, we've already got an egg cell, don't produce another one. Okay, we don't want to have two pregnancies at the same time. So your job is done for now. Just keep laying low. Okay, so we see that FSH and LH is low during the last 14 days of the cycle. Now, pregnancy does not occur. So there's actually another hormone that, if pregnancy occurs, will then keep the corpus luteum intact, but you do not need to know that. Okay, so if pregnancy did occur, the corpus luteum will stay this size. It will be big and keep on producing progesterone. But now it did not occur, so now it starts to shrink. Okay, it becomes smaller and smaller. And remember, if it's big, it can produce large amount of progesterone, but now it's becoming smaller and smaller, and we see that there's a drop in progesterone. Okay, and that drop in progesterone is an indication that pregnancy did not occur. And then what happens is the hormone that is keeping this vascular structure of the endometrium intact is not present anymore. And so now it sheds this inner lining of the endometrium, and that is what we call menstruation. It actually tears off from the womb and is then released as blood through the vagina. Okay, sorry, I could have added those, sorry. Okay, so follicle stimulating hormone, and then it stimulates the ovary to develop. So when the ovary is developing, it releases estrogen. Estrogen then stimulates the endometrium to develop. Okay, and then as the estrogen level peaks, it stimulates the release of LH, and LH is then released, causing ovulation on day 14, and the remnants turn into the corpus luteum, releasing progesterone. Progesterone keeps the endometrium intact and stops LH and FSH to be released. Okay. An important question that I love to ask is a contraceptive pill that contains progesterone. How is this preventing pregnancy? So what the pill contains is high levels of progesterone, and that triggers the negative feedback of the hypothesis. So instead of having a drop in progesterone levels at the end of my cycle, I will start my cycle with a high progesterone level, and that will then stop the release of FSH. So no follicle will develop during the cycle, therefore no ovum is released and no pregnancy can occur. So that is just a little hint when you are doing this. So progesterone can be used as a contraceptive in females. Okay. let's see
Alright.
what say Monica on fertilization, implantation, and gestation.
All right. I am quickly going to go through this, and then I actually want us to look at a few questions to just solidify what we have been saying so far. So as mentioned, fertilization, or firstly actually ovulation, takes place from the ovary, and then an egg cell is going to be released into the fallopian tube. Right. Then the next important thing that needs to happen is fertilization, and here the sperm cell and the egg cell will meet, and that will form a diploid zygote. Then after they meet each other, after the zygote is formed, mitosis is going to happen. So then we go, so there's a zygote, then there are 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, and then eventually we have a whole ball of cells. And that ball of cells is called a morula. And then the next level of development is where it is called a blastocyst. And it is that structure that will implant and attach to the endometrium. All right, so this whole process over there is just mitosis. The zygote is just dividing and developing. You need to know this word morula, and then you need to know that the end product is a blastocyst that will implant. Right, so there we have, just going to wait until the animation starts again, a zygote, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, a morula, a ball of cells, and then last form is blastocyst. Some textbooks might call it a blastula, blastocyst, but that structure, that final structure, will be the one that implants. So here's just a quick little video. I think this is a time lapse maybe, but it shows you after fertilization, the cells basically just doubling in size. So then a next development would be that ball of cells. I think I might have missed it. Then this is sort of now the formation of your, I think I just want to play that again. There we go. And then the last phase would then just be a blastocyst. So there we have 2 cells, probably 4. It's a bit difficult to count all these cells. But when we have a ball of cells, that would be a morula. And then the next formation of development would then be a blastocyst. All right. So then after it's a blastocyst, it will implant, and we call that process implantation. Right. And now for the last 7 minutes or so, I'm going to just quickly skip just a few slides, and I think it would be quite nice to just end off with a few questions, so that you know what is expected of you, and we can sort of just hammer on a few things that are important. Right. So here we have 3 diagrams, and they mention in the diagram that we have an ovum, a sperm cell, and some part of the male reproductive system. Right, so as I explained, this is now an ovum without those follicular cells that we find on the outside. So now don't be confused for the label for A. So there we have B and A, so we can just quickly label them. So A would then be the jelly layer. If there would have been a layer of cells on the outside, that would have then been the follicular cells. And then B is just the fluid here in the cell, so that would be the cytoplasm. Then here we have a structure of a sperm cell, which Lindy also drew for us. So that label for C, that bubble that is at the tip of the head, that would be the acrosome. Then they don't really ask for the labels for D and E, but I'm pretty sure that you would be able to give me the label for D. That would have been the nucleus. And then the label for E, which they also don't ask, but that would have been the mitochondria that is found in the neck. And then here we have an F, which is also not asked, but that would have been the tail or the flagellum. Right, and here we just have a basic structure. You have the male reproductive system. They indicate the vas deferens, so that's a nice clue. So G, here we have the testis, and then H, this would be the scrotum. Right, here we have a nice question for 4 marks. Describe the process of spermatogenesis. So this is directly from your notes. It takes place under the influence of testosterone, where diploid cells undergo meiosis to form haploid cells, and that takes place in the seminiferous tubules. Right, now we get to some questions about what is happening here. Here they're asking for a letter, in which letter, give me the letter of the part of the sperm cell that enters the ovum. So you're supposed to know that that is the nucleus. Now you have to match the letter which represents the nucleus. So that would then be D. Next we have the letter of 2 parts that enable the sperm to move towards the ovum. So we're definitely looking at this section. So it enables it to move. Definitely F, because it's the tail. It facilitates movement. And then definitely E, because E gives the sperm the energy to be able to move. Okay, next up, the test results show that a man has a low sperm count. Explain why a doctor would advise the man to wear underwear that is not too tight. So Lindy explained this quite well. That has to do with the temperature. So when the temperature, so sperm has an optimal temperature in which like the most effective sperm is formed, and that temperature is a little bit like 2-3 degrees lower than body temperature. So wearing too tight underwear, as Lindy explained, is the testis is being pulled closer to the body. And the body is 37 degrees. So that means that the testes would then be placed under a higher temperature, which will result in less effective sperm. So looking at the question, they're asking why they would advise a man not to wear underwear that is tight. So here, the tight underwear will pull the testes closer to the body, so the temperature will be a little bit higher, and therefore the sperm will not be effectively formed, or it will not mature, or in some way you interpret it that the sperm is negatively affected. Alright, so Lindy is going to explain to us some hormonal questions which you might get.
Okay, so in this question they say study the graph below and identify hormones A and B. So the first thing you need to do is go look at the topic of the graph, meaning the heading. This is levels of 2 ovarian hormones. So that is a big tip of where these hormones come from. Remember, there's 4 hormones. We've got 2 from the hypophysis and 2 from the ovary. So these are the ones that is coming from the ovary, released during the menstrual cycle. And then they give us time in days at the bottom, up to 27 days, and then the hormone levels on the y-axis, and we see that they actually indicate to us that ovulation is on day 14, and then we have hormone A and hormone B. So we know that the 2 hormones is released from the ovary is estrogen and progesterone, and what we should know is that the first 14 days estrogen will be high and progesterone will be low. So the first 14 days, A is high, and we can see that B is low. So therefore, A is estrogen and B is progesterone. Okay, then question 2.2. What effect does an increase in hormone A have on the endometrium? So what they're actually asking us is, what is the function of estrogen? So what is really important to see here is that if I identify these hormones wrong, this question is also going to be wrong. So you'll be actually losing 4 marks. Okay, so having your basic knowledge is really, really important so that you can have the application knowledge as well. So what does hormone A do? What does estrogen do? It allows the endometrium to grow and become more vascular and glandular so that it can actually attach to the blastocyst during implantation. Okay, our time is up, apparently.
All right. Grade 12s, it has been wonderful to spend some time with you. We hope that you have learned a lot. Thank you for being in our class today, and we hope you have a lovely day further. Goodbye.
Goodbye, guys. Have a lovely day.